Hello to everyone. I am Benyamin Poghosyan from CivilNeT, and this is Crossroad, a program where we break down the political news of the day. At this episode of Crossroad, we will discuss the prospects of the Nagorno Karabakh conflict settlement with Tom de Waal, Senior Fellow, Carnegie Europe. Tom, thank you very much for accepting the invitation and thank you for your time. I would like to focus our attention on key players' interests in South Caucasus and in particular in Nagorno Karabakh conflict. And let's start from Russia, definitely the main player in the region. So what do you think? What are the key strategic interests of Russia in the South Caucasus, and how Russia perceives Nagorno Karabakh conflict or the possible ways of its settlement as a tool to support or move forward its strategic interests?
Well, first of all, I'm also glad to be with you today, joining you from London. It's a very big topic, of course, Russia and the Karabakh conflict. I think it's important to begin by saying that Russia has a very different approach to this conflict to the other post-Soviet conflicts, whether it be Ukraine, Transnistria, Abkhazia, or South Ossetia. Russia has interests on both sides of the conflict. It tries to cultivate good relations both with Armenia and with Azerbaijan. Russia, I think, also has less of a direct strategic interest in the outcome of this conflict than in the others. I think Russia certainly wants to keep its influence in the South Caucasus with both countries, but Russia does not want to take on the prime responsibility for this conflict. If you listen to Putin over the years, many times he said, it's not up to Russia to solve this conflict, it's up to the Armenians and the Azerbaijanis. What are Russia's interests here? It's obviously Russia has an interest, as we can see in many statements by Sergei Lavrov and others, in opening up communications to the south, to the Middle East, to Turkey and Iran via routes which are currently closed, and closed also because Abkhazia is closed as a route to the South Caucasus. That's one interest. Russia has an interest in having a military presence in the South Caucasus, maintaining its presence in Armenia, discussing possibly having one in Azerbaijan, though I think that's quite unrealistic. And Russia obviously wants to basically maintain its kind of political influence in this region. Having said all that, I think often we overestimate the geopolitics of this conflict. I think this is basically a local conflict in which the local actors are often using the geopolitics to fight the conflict. I don't think there's a strong geopolitical interest in this conflict, either in Moscow or in Washington or in Europe, even in Turkey. I think this is primarily a local conflict. I think Sergei Lavrov, over the years, has taken a personal interest in this conflict. And I think Sergei Lavrov, foreign minister in general, sees ways in which Russia could increase its influence by a phased Karabakh agreement. I don't think, for example, President Putin spends much time thinking about this conflict. He has other priorities.
Tom, since maybe 2014, Russia has been pushing forward the so-called Lavrov plan, a little bit modified version of Kazan document, at least according to what we know from public sources. The Lavrov plan envisages the return to Azerbaijan some territories and deployment of Russian peacekeeping forces. And initially, both Armenia and Azerbaijan were against this plan. But now some experts argue that maybe Azerbaijan changed his mind, and now Azerbaijan will be glad to see such a solution as the only tangible way to get back some territories. And this expert mentioned the statements done by President Aliyev during Munich debate with Armenian Prime Minister Pashinyan, when Aliyev stated that yes, Azerbaijan accepts Russian proposals, and we believe that this proposal is a good way to move forward. What's your thoughts?
I'm a bit skeptical, to be honest. I don't see that Azerbaijan sees a great strategic interest in accepting a Russian plan, or Russian peacekeepers in the region. Azerbaijan and also Armenia, it has to be said, has a balancing foreign policy. They don't want to get too close to one neighboring power or another. Maybe the only exception for Azerbaijan is Turkey, but certainly not Russia, given Azerbaijan's history with Russia. This week, Azerbaijan is marking the centenary of the Bolshevik takeover in Azerbaijan, which is
in 1920.
In 1920, which is triggering some very anti-Russian sentiments in society. So I think Azerbaijan traditionally doesn't want to get too close to one military bloc or another. Also, I think we should remember the 1994 ceasefire, which was a two-stage plan by Russia. First of all, there was a ceasefire. The second phase of that plan was supposed to be Russian peacekeepers. Pavel Grachov, the then Russian defense minister, was pushing for Russian peacekeepers. And basically, Azerbaijan strongly opposed this. And also the Armenian side, I think, quietly opposed this. They didn't want to see Russian peacekeepers in the region. And that was blocked. Subsequently, there was, of course, the Russian radar station at Gabala, which was closed down. So I don't think Azerbaijan wants to see Russian troops re-enter its territory, even if it's linked to a possible return of territories. The devil here is all in the detail, and I think other countries have seen that once the Russian troops are there, it's very difficult to get them to leave. In the case of Abkhazia, South Ossetia, Transnistria, Russian troops have been there since the 1990s. So I understand why Armenians are looking at this very closely, but I would be very surprised if Azerbaijan ultimately accepted this plan.
Thank you, Tom. And let's discuss now the other key players' interest in the region, in particular United States. Of course, we all understand that Nagorno Karabakh is not among the top US foreign policy agenda, but we may assume that when since 2014, since the Ukraine crisis, the US starts to employ the so-called Russia containment strategy to contain Russia in the post-Soviet space and to prevent the growth of Russian influence in the post-Soviet space. And the South Caucasus is a part of post-Soviet space, which means that this strategy also covers the South Caucasus. So what do you think, what is the US policy regarding the Nagorno-Karabakh conflict if we look through the lenses of American Russia containment strategy in post-Soviet space?
Certainly, US policy in post-Soviet space is very much based around Russia, containment of Russia, as you say, since 2014. Having said that, I think, again, Nagorno-Karabakh conflict is a little bit of an exception for two reasons. One, since late 1990s, Russia and US have been co-chairs of the Minsk Group, and they found this collaboration quite useful. I think both Armenia and Azerbaijan have found having US and Russia, and of course France, as co-chairs quite useful. It means that a settlement will not be, if it ever comes, will not only be acceptable to local actors, but to international actors. It's useful to have a kind of veto from US or Russia on any outcome. So that's one factor. Also, of course, the US sees Karabakh conflict also through two powerful interest groups in the US. One is the Armenian diaspora lobby, which is very powerful in Congress, and also there's an Azerbaijan lobby, which is primarily in Pentagon and in the oil industry. So I think it's a little more complicated than that. Clearly, I believe that if there was a plan for Russian peacekeepers, that the US and France would be quite skeptical about this for the Karabakh conflict. They don't see it in their interests to have Russian peacekeepers, maybe as a part of a mixed contingent, but certainly not Russia having a monopoly on the peacekeeping in the Karabakh conflict. For many reasons. One reason, obviously, being Georgia, that the US for many years has tried to get Russian troops out of Georgia,
yes.
And they don't want to see them suddenly reappear to the south of Georgia.
Let's discuss the policy of other regional states, I mean Turkey and Iran. Many in Armenia strongly believes that Iran is fully satisfied with current status quo, and Iran will oppose any changes in status quo, any territorial changes, and also Iran will firmly oppose any deployment of foreign military forces along its de jure border with Azerbaijan, regardless if they are Russian troops, mixed troops, or whatever else. But also we understand that due to the US sanctions, oil price slump, and also COVID-19 pandemic, Iran now faces much more serious problems, and maybe he has no resources to prevent the change of status quo in South Caucasus. Regarding the Turkey, definitely Turkey and Russia, despite all up and downs in their bilateral relations, they see each other as competitors in the South Caucasus, and definitely Turkey is not interested in growing Russian influence in Azerbaijan. But simultaneously, Turkey always argues for return of some territories back to Azerbaijan. And what do you think if Russia will offer Turkey a deal? Okay, I will manage the return of some territories back to Azerbaijan, and you should support the offer of deploying only Russian peacekeepers on these territories. What will Turkey's offer or answer be?
Well, first of all, we have to say that both Iran and Turkey, they're neighbors, but they're not very influential voices in this conflict. Iran, the one and only time it was a mediator was in 1992, 28 years ago. Since then, it's not been part of any formal processes. It's not a member of OSCE or any of the negotiating formats. Iran, of course, has a strong interest, but as you've mentioned, Iran is much more preoccupied with Iraq, with Syria, with the United States, and now, of course, with a serious outbreak of COVID-19 on its territory. So I think Iran, sure, it's happy to see the status quo. It doesn't want to upset relations either with Azerbaijan or with Armenia, but it's not really a big agenda item for Iran, shall we say. As for Turkey, important thing now, I think, for Turkey the last 10 years is it needs allies. It's has many fewer friends in the world than it used to, and Azerbaijan is seen as a strong ally, despite what used to be a difficult personal relationship with Mr. Erdogan and Mr. Aliyev. I think they now support each other. So I think Turkey will basically support any plan that Azerbaijan supports. And I don't. If Azerbaijan supports a plan, Turkey will support that plan. Turkey, I think, would be happy to open the border with Armenia to restore diplomatic relations with Armenia if Baku allows it. That would give it greater access to South Caucasus, open up markets, open up communication routes. But for Turkey, it's all about the relationship with Baku and with having a rare example of a good ally in the region.
And now let's discuss global geopolitics or global developments and seek to understand what impact may they have on South Caucasus and in particular on Karabakh conflict. Many experts argue that post-COVID-19 world will see growing US-China confrontation, rivalry, or conflict even, and that the United States is not interested to see the Russia fully on Chinese side in this coming conflict. They want to see more balanced Russian approach, or even they want to see more pro-West or pro-US Russia. Mm-hmm. So they will make some efforts at least to start the normalization process with Russia. But the key hot point between West and Russia, between the US and Russia, is the post-Soviet space. Definitely Ukraine, but also other post-Soviet countries. So according to this logic, the deal can be reached between US Russia and West Russia in general, according to which West will de facto recognize the part of post-Soviet space as a Russian zone of influence, will stop its intentions to bring post-Soviet states into NATO or into EU, and instead Russia will weaken its growing relations with China, and Russia will pursue more balanced foreign policy. First of all, do you believe that such a deal is possible in the coming years? And if such a deal is possible, what impact it may have on South Caucasus and on Karabakh conflict in particular?
Well, it's an interesting hypothesis, but I think there's a lot of problems with it. We're not living in the 19th century where the big powers of the world decide everything, and the small powers of the world suddenly fall into line. And we're living in a world where sovereignty matters. The sovereignty of small powers also matters, and these powers are not going to allow themselves to be pawns in a game. Also, living in a very interconnected world, I'm sure there will be a US-China political confrontation will deepen. We're already seeing that.
Yes.
The election year will increase that. But US and China also probably the world's biggest trading relationships between US and China, and they need each other. And when it comes to Russia, obviously there are those who want to see a US-Russia reset, some of them in France and Germany, maybe some in the US. But maybe if there was a different master in the Kremlin, that might be possible. If there was a new Mikhail Gorbachev in the Kremlin, there might be some possibilities. But Russia under Putin, is heading down still an extremely anti-Western mood. It's all about regime consolidation. It's about a very anti-Western ideology. They're not giving those in the West who want to work with Russia much material to work with at the moment, the Putin regime. And let me sort of get back to the point of sovereignty. The opinions of Ukraine, of Georgia, Armenia, Azerbaijan, these are now independent states now for almost 30 years. They may be fairly weak states in many ways, but their opinion matters. They're not going to allow themselves suddenly to become part of the Russian sphere of influence. Again, they have relationships with EU, with Turkey, with China. Russia, for them, is history. It's the past. It's not the future. Of course, the EU will have less capacity, I think, in the post-COVID-19 world. I don't think we're going to see membership of EU or NATO for these countries. They're still going to be the countries in between, but I don't see them returning to the Russian sphere of influence. I don't see a US-Russia reset. And I think we'll just see this rather picture continuing, in which there's a kind of lot of balancing going between EU, Russia, China, US by these small countries, in which they can basically, protect themselves to a minimum degree. And for that reason, I also don't believe that we're going to see much progress in the Karabakh conflict, because to make progress in that conflict, you need a much more stable international order. You need much more consensus between the big powers of the world, and that's certainly not going to happen anytime soon.
So if we will seek to summarize our discussion, you believe that for coming at least years, there will be no significant changes in status quo in Nagorno Karabakh, and we will have much or less the same situation as we have now.
I think that's correct. And let me get back to the point which I always make, which is, of course, there's a geopolitical context to this conflict, but it's basically driven by Armenia and Azerbaijan, their identity as nation states, the way that they perceive one another, their historic inability to work together to solve this conflict, which for many objective reasons. And until that internal local problem is solved, I don't think the Karabakh conflict can be resolved.
Thank you, Tom. Thank you very much. Thank you for your time, and thank you for being with us.